The story begins with a girl being chased by several soldiers. She runs away from them, exhausted from all the running but determined to continue. One of them stops running out of fear and warns that in the depths of that forest lives the Demon King, explaining that he hates humans and is quite cruel and violent with anyone who approaches his lair. However, despite his warning, the other soldiers do not take that story very seriously. At this moment, some other guards arrive to report that a villager told them he had seen the girl, and they all rush in the direction they were pointing. However, the girl was actually much closer than they imagined, hidden from them behind a tree. She checks that the path is clear and takes advantage of the distraction of the soldiers to continue fleeing. As she runs, she apologizes to her sister Natalia for leaving without explaining. Desperate, the poor girl doesn't notice the cliff in front of her and rolls down the hill in the darkness of the forest. After the great fall, in addition to being exhausted, the girl was all bruised and could see a lit house very close to her before fainting. The next day, a boy with hair half white and half black reads the newspaper about a woman from a neighboring country who was missing, probably having fled to another nation. He folds the newspaper and enters the middle of the forest, spotting some animals gathered around something. He thinks it's a monster, but as he approaches, he realizes it's just a girl who had passed out in the middle of the forest. He picks up the girl, assuming she's the same girl from the newspaper, and notices that he's being observed by a soldier hiding behind a tree. He approaches, and the man tries to strike him, but the boy easily escapes as if he could teleport, leaving the soldier confused about how he got behind him so quickly. The boy explains that he used an elemental illusion magic. Noticing the man's uniform, he realizes that he is one of the private guards of the kingdom of Niruz, who works for the royal family and questions why such high-class guards were in that forest. With a hand signal, the man calls all his co-workers, surrounding the boy from all directions. He instructs the boy to hand over the girl in his arms, saying she's a great criminal who has brought disgrace to the entire nation, which surprises the boy as she appeared to be quite innocent. The guard promises that if the boy hands over the girl without causing any trouble, they won't harm him. However, if he resists, they will show no mercy. Upon hearing the guard's warning, the boy responds by refusing to hand over the girl. Immediately, the guards arm themselves and advance towards him to attack, but the boy evades, explaining that between suspects like them and a delicate, slender girl like her, he would obviously choose the girl's side. Since the boy had both hands occupied holding the girl, the guards decide to take advantage of this disadvantage to attack simultaneously. However, the boy uses another spell called Ice Shackles to freeze their feet, leaving them trapped on the ground. Next, he conjures a ball of light and his hood falls, revealing his black and white hair. The guard recognizes that the boy is the feared Demon King who resides in the forest. The boy corrects the guard, stating in a very intimidating manner that he is, in fact, the great Demon King. He then casts another spell called Phantom Illusion, affecting the entire area and causing all the guards to collapse at once. To ensure that the spell had worked, he asks one of the guards what had happened, and the guard replies that they had searched the entire forest, but the woman's trail had disappeared. They concluded that she had been attacked by some monster and decided it was best to return to report what had happened. The guards slowly walk away through the forest, clearly under the influence of the spell, which would wear off later, and they would not remember anything that had happened there. Later in his home, which is filled with various plants and herbs, the Demon King gazes at the unconscious girl, not understanding why a girl like her was being sought as a major criminal. He reads the newspaper again, and at that moment, the girl finally wakes up, feeling a bit disoriented about her whereabouts. He offers her a drink, and she explains that she was lost in the forest and saw a mansion in the distance, but when she tried to approach, she fainted. He then shows her the newspaper with a drawing that is an exact likeness of her, stating that she is the bride of the second prince of the kingdom of Niruz, named Charlotte Evans. Worried to see that he knows her identity, she tries to deny that it's her, but the Demon King reassures Charlotte, saying that he can tell when someone is lying just by looking into their eyes, and that he sees no trace of deception in her eyes. This makes the girl cry with relief, as he is the first person to believe her. He then gives Charlotte some time to recover, and once she is feeling better, she begins to explain that everything happened suddenly. At a nobility party, the prince of the kingdom of Niruz, Cecil, announces that he has something to say and calls for Charlotte. This causes many people to start whispering, as many did not know who she was, and others were already aware that she was Prince Cecil's fiancée. However, all had some cruel comments about her, such as rumors that she is the daughter of a mistress, or that she had never been seen talking to the prince. When Charlotte appears in the crowd approaching Prince Cecil, she hears the comments about her. After that, Cecil makes his announcement, revealing that the evil deeds allegedly committed by Charlotte had finally been discovered, causing several people to whisper about the many accusations he reads out to everyone. However, despite not being related to the accusations, no one questioned Prince Cecil's words. He then condemns Charlotte to imprisonment and cancels their engagement with a smile on his face. Then the guards take the poor girl who begged for someone to believe her to prison. After finishing listening to her story, the Demon King found it quite obvious that Prince Cecil had set her up, either because he didn't want to marry a bastard or because he had some other woman in the mix. Charlotte then thanked him for all the help he was giving her, but warned that she had to leave before someone could find her. The Demon King interrupted Charlotte, asking if she was good at cleaning, making it clear that he was terrible at it. She replied that she could clean like any ordinary person, and he said he would hire her as a live-in maid. He explained that she would be responsible for taking care of household chores and in return would be paid receive 3 meals a day and some snacks. He continued saying there were plenty of rooms, so there wouldn't be any problem with having an extra person living there. Charlotte was confused and asked if he understood that she was a wanted criminal. He then reflected for a moment, remembering that he had isolated himself in the depths of the forest precisely to avoid dealing with people and that sheltering a fugitive went against that purpose. However, he decided to open up to Charlotte, saying that he had also been betrayed by someone like her. Then he finally introduced himself as Alan Crawford and began to recount how, 3 years ago, he had been invited to join an adventurers group. But from the beginning, they only wanted to use him to break the seal of the temple and steal its treasure. After they achieved their goal, they abandoned him there, surrounded by monsters. Charlotte was horrified by the terrible story Alan had told, leaving him impressed by her pure-hearted belief in him without a second thought. He continued, explaining that when he went through that, there was no one to help him, so he couldn't let her stay alone either. But even with all his appeals, Charlotte insisted on leaving because she knew that staying would only bring trouble for him. So Alan decided to appeal even more by pretending to place a deadly curse on himself. He said he would only remove the spell when she agreed to work for him, adding that she had only 3 minutes to decide because after that, his heart would stop. He began to speak like a true villain, saying that if she refused, she would be responsible for the death of an innocent civilian, leaving her in tears and even a bit scared of him, despite knowing he was a good person who was only doing this to help her. He rushed Charlotte even more, reminding her that time was passing, and then pretended to be unable to breathe, convincing Charlotte to stay with him in less than a minute thanks to his dirty trick. So the next day, Charlotte began her new job by cleaning Alan's entire house, leaving the boy impressed because she didn't look like a noble from a duke's family. She explained that she was used to this type of work because she cleaned her own home. Alan already knew this information when he found Charlotte in the forest, as he noticed that her hands were rougher, more like those of a servant than a noble girl. She mentioned that she had even waxed the floor, though he had helped her by using magic to clean up the mess. This made her question whether he really needed her assistance, but he insisted that he had no skills for keeping the house tidy and that he forgot about cleaning when he was alone. Charlotte was excited to help and asked about her next task, but Alan said there was nothing left for her to do. She could relax until dinner, and he suggested that she could spend her free time reading a book from the library or taking a walk in the garden, but not to disturb him because he had work to do. This left her a bit disappointed, and Alan admitted to himself that he wasn't very good at socializing. He knew that sooner or later, Charlotte would get tired of him and leave, so he decided to leave some money around the house for her to find when that time came. Then he began one of his few hobbies, finding errors in magical theory research and filling the paper with corrections. After a while, he finally got tired of it, and when he stood up, he was surprised to see Charlotte on the floor. He asked her what she was doing, and she said she was counting the grains of wood on the floor, which made Alan worry about her pastime. He asked Charlotte what she used to do when she had free time, and she replied that she didn't have any because when she wasn't training to be a bride, she was cleaning or mending clothes. This made Alan think that she had a terrible life, smiling while saying it. Since she didn't have any hobbies, he asked if she liked anything about her bride training, but she said it wasn't very enjoyable as they scolded her whenever she made a mistake. He then asked if she had any happy memories, and she said yes, which excited him. She recounted that 2 months ago, her sister Natalia had given her a fruit that, even though it was bruised, tasted delicious. This left him frustrated to see that such a simple memory was considered a happy moment. After all, he had fond memories at the Magic Academy, like when he tormented the professors with questions or caused explosions in the classroom with his experimental potions. Even during the time when she should have been having fun, she was living a Cinderella-like life with no hobbies or good memories. With this, he made a decision to show Charlotte all the inappropriate things that exist in the world. So he sold his magical equipment to buy some things to bring a bit of pleasure and joy into her life. He said that doing inappropriate things could be fun, even addictive, startling Charlotte. However, he reassured her that they wouldn't do anything illegal, just things that everyone does, finally revealing the thousands of candies of all kinds he had bought for her to enjoy for dinner. As expected, she gave an exemplary response, saying it wasn't appropriate to eat so many sweets because she needed a balanced diet. But this only made Alan even more excited because he knew she didn't eat properly in her own home, treating her as a family member in public and as a servant when they were alone. He then offered her a piece of cake to taste, but despite his insistence, she continued to refuse to eat sweets for dinner. So Alan threatened to use his deadly curse on himself again, immediately changing Charlotte's mind. She told Alan to start by picking the ones he liked, but he revealed that he didn't like sweets. This made Charlotte feel embarrassed to see everything he had done just for her. After trying the cake, she burst into tears because she had never received something so kind, questioning if she really had the right to be happy like this. Alan then said they were just getting started and promised to show her all the pleasures that exist by filling her with delicious foods and taking her to various places in the world to experience fun things until she could say she was the happiest person on earth. He gave her some more candies, and Charlotte said she couldn't eat them all by herself, which made Alan decide to try one of the sweets and realize it wasn't as bad as he had thought. And so they ate sweets together, with Alan determined to make an effort for Charlotte. However, somewhere in the forest, a creature was interested in getting to know the Demon King. In the early hours, Alan thought about how Charlotte had been a mere stranger until recently, but now he was willing to introduce her to all the pleasures that exist in the world. Alan had already shown her the sweets, preserving them with magic so she could enjoy them slowly, although he hadn't imagined she would be so excited about a piece of cake. However, he didn't want to stop at just food and wondered what the next thing he would introduce to Charlotte would be. In the morning, Alan woke up after spending the night listing inappropriate things to show Charlotte, making elaborate plans to make the girl happy. He thought he was brilliant for coming up with all those things, but then realized he would be the only one happy with them and discarded his notes, deciding to come up with a new plan. As he left his office, Alan bumped into Charlotte, who was already awake and doing her household chores. She found it strange that he had woken up so early, and Alan explained that he had fallen asleep while studying, thinking it was better not to mention that he had spent the entire night making plans for her. She noticed that he hadn't slept at all during the night and that it wasn't good for his health. He agreed and explained that it was precisely for this reason that he needed to rest for a while and asked her to have breakfast without him. At that moment, Alan noticed that Charlotte was holding a broom. She said she thought about doing some cleaning, and he was surprised because he didn't even remember having that broom. He told her she didn't need to clean anything more because she had already done everything that was necessary, but she insisted because she wanted to be useful to repay her debt to him. He told her that she didn't need to work so hard every day, but she explained that she was used to this kind of routine. Alan thought that a duke's family, like the one she came from, must have had numerous servants, and yet they treated her as inferior to a servant. Moreover, she had been exiled for crimes she didn't commit, and when he remembered everything she had been through, he became angry. Charlotte continued with her cleaning, explaining that she would try to be as quiet as possible, not to disturb his rest. Alone, Alan reflected on how she never spoke ill of others and showed no hint of resentment, not even toward the family that mistreated her or her ex-fiancé who had plotted against her. He thought that if he were in Charlotte's place, he would have already sought revenge on them, and he imagined that she must have some resentments, but he couldn't see them or was afraid to speak about them, thinking that she must be scared and suffering from low self-esteem. At that moment, Alan heard voices and, understanding what was happening, rushed to his door. Charlotte had just met a girl with cat ears, who introduced herself as Mage, a delivery person. Alan explained that Mage handled the deliveries of his orders and told Mage that Charlotte was a new employee he had hired. Charlotte greeted the delivery person, and Mage said she didn't expect the Demon King to have so much money to afford a maid. Charlotte found it strange how Mage referred to him, and Alan explained that it was just a nickname. At that moment, Alan's fears came true. Mage began to find Charlotte's face familiar and recognized her as the girl who had been in all the newspapers. Charlotte was so nervous about being recognized that she dropped her broom, and Alan thought that her reaction was only making it clear to Mage that she was the same person from the newspapers. To try and defuse the situation, Alan began to provide some explanations, but Mage interrupted him, saying that in her company, customers always come first, so it wasn't her business who they hired. She even pretended not to have understood anything about Charlotte, leaving both of them relieved. Charlotte thanked her, and Mage explained that the Kingdom of Niraz wasn't even in their delivery service area, so she didn't need to worry. Alan asked what would have happened if it were in their service area, and Mage said she had no idea, but from her reaction, Alan understood that it wouldn't have ended well. Afterward, Mage finally made her delivery, and Alan asked her to take some of his potions to the city's magic shop, warning her to be careful not to break any merchandise. Alan sold his potions to this shop, and since they were excellent, they sold very well with high demand. Therefore, Mage asked why Alan didn't live in the city because that way he could sell even more. However, he replied that the city had too many people, making it clear that he didn't like to socialize. Mage suggested that he should enjoy life more while he was still young, but he replied quite coldly that it was none of her business. This startled Mage. She said that it was because of his scary face that people in the city called him the Demon King. Although he didn't like the comment, he admitted that it was a nickname to be expected from a stern-faced wizard living on the outskirts of the forest. He explained that children from the city ventured into the forest to learn more about the dangerous Demon King who lived there as a test of courage, and they froze in fear when they saw him. But the truth was that he was just a simple wizard who wanted to live in a quieter place. Mage called him the antisocial nice guy since he hated people but couldn't abandon someone in need. She also advised him to find a hobby or a life goal, but he said that it was none of her business again, leaving his delivery person once more startled by his ominous way of speaking. He then asked if her company also dealt with mail orders. Mage explained that they sold various types of accessories and could get anything for him. She handed over catalogs, and after Alan had a look, he gave them to Charlotte, asking her to make a list of what she wanted to buy because he didn't know what the two ladies needed. Charlotte was grateful but felt like she was already taking advantage of him since he had bought sweets for her the day before. He'd assured her that she could ask for whatever she wanted, and if she refused, he would give her the entire catalog. Mage told Charlotte not to accept that kind of behavior, but the girls still felt indebted to Alan. Mage advised her to let loose and punch him because it was the best way to let go of negative emotions and release stress, completely forgetting her role as a customer. However, this helped Alan decide on the next inappropriate thing he would show Charlotte. The next day, Mage arrived with another delivery, bringing Charlotte's chosen items from the catalog and Alan's order. Mage asked what he would do with those items, and he explained that he had bought them for Charlotte, surprising Mage. Charlotte was frightened by what he was planning this time, so he revealed that he had bought a sandbag, a boxing training tool, for her. Charlotte asked if it was for her exercise, but Alan clarified that the purpose was for her to release all her stress. He placed a photo of the prince, her ex-fiancé, on the sandbag and asked her to release all her anger on it. Charlotte didn't like the idea very much, so Alan explained that being patient was good, but it was also necessary to let go sometimes because otherwise suppressed emotions would overflow and break her down at some point, which he didn't want to happen. Alan said that anyone would hesitate to punch something, but soon it would become an addiction, staying it as if it were some kind of villain. But Charlotte explained that she didn't feel any anger toward her ex-fiancé. Alan said he couldn't understand how because he had seen the newspaper where he had turned her into a criminal with no place in her own country, taking everything from her. However, Charlotte believed he must have had a good reason for doing so. Alan insisted that regardless of the reason, it didn't justify treating her that way, but Charlotte felt like she had a debt to her family for raising her and couldn't hold any resentment toward the prince. With this, Alan realized that it would be more difficult than he had thought and that everything he had planned wouldn't work. He had thought about making her accept her resentment, infiltrating the kingdom of Nuruz and revealing the prince's crimes so that Charlotte could prove her innocence and be happy with all the problems resolved. However, he now realized that if he followed this plan and the prince were condemned, she would end up blaming herself. Mage witnessed the entire scene, and despite knowing it wasn't very professional to get involved in customers' problems, she decided to give Alan some advice, suggesting that he should go easy on Charlotte. Alan agreed to some extent, but it wasn't his style to simply wait for things to resolve themselves over time. So he tried something different, asking Charlotte to punch him instead of the sandbag. This left both girls very confused, and Charlotte panicked upon hearing his request. She refused to do something like that to someone who had done so much for her, making it clear that she couldn't punch him. However, Alan decided to interfere with her decision, using magic to control her hand, making her punch him directly in the face. Both girls were shocked and didn't understand what happened. Alan explained that he had used magic to make her throw a punch like a professional boxer, and said it was a good punch. Charlotte was in despair because Alan's face was all bruised. He then said that he did it to prove that no matter what she did, he would never abandon her, stating that he would always be by her side, and she was free to feel and say whatever she wanted. Charlotte asked why he had made her punch him in the face just to say that, and she was angry that he had gone to such extremes. Alan was pleased to see that she could express herself when she wanted to and reassured her that he could heal himself completely with magic within seconds. Charlotte understood that she didn't need to be afraid of anything, but she said that it didn't change the fact that he had hurt himself and asked him never to do something like that again because she couldn't bear it. Meanwhile, Mage punched the sandbag, finding the whole situation a bit crazy. Seeing how much he had upset Charlotte, Alan promised never to do something like that again. She also understood that she could now express herself even though she knew it wouldn't change overnight because she wasn't used to doing it. However, she promised to make an effort because she wanted to be able to say what she thought. Alan understood that he had to take it slow and just offer his support to her, making it clear that he would be by her side during the process, no matter how long it took. This made Charlotte very happy, and the whole conversation made Mage think that they would soon use her delivery company's services a lot, needing items like a double bed, a ring, and eventually, baby items. Charlotte and Alan were confused, unable to imagine why they would need such things, while Mage clearly saw a future for the couple. Meanwhile, outside, right in front of Alan's house, a girl with cat ears appeared, determined not to let him escape. The next day, Alan asks Charlotte if she wants coffee or tea for breakfast. She replies that she wants the same as him, but as soon as Alan explains that he'll be having a nutritious potion, she changes her mind and chooses tea. Alan asks her to be more honest, but he understands. After all, before living there, Charlotte couldn't even decide on simple things. She shares that the first decision she made on her own was to escape from prison, and the second was choosing her breakfast drink. Alan says both decisions were important, and anything she wants to try, she can ask him. Suddenly, the girl with cat ears enters through the window, startling Charlotte. Alan asks how she found his house, and the girl explains that she deduced his location through the pollen on his letters. She mentions that it was easy to find him by asking people about a peculiar wizard until she located his residence. Charlotte asks Alan who the girl is, and she introduces herself as Iruka Crawford, an apprentice magical engineer and Alan's younger sister. He explains that he lost his parents at a young age, and the Crawfords, Iruka's parents, adopted him. Charlotte apologizes for getting involved in family matters, but Alan doesn't mind and mentions that she and Iruka are the same age. His sister then asks if Charlotte is his girlfriend. Both immediately deny it, saying at the same time that they are not a couple. Alan explains that Charlotte might be disgusted if people think she's dating a sinister and troublesome wizard, so he clarifies things. Charlotte says she never thought that about him, and Iruka asks how Alan can talk about himself like that without feeling bad. Iruka then questions who Charlotte is, and Alan decides to be honest. He explains that she is a criminal who escaped from the neighboring nation. Charlotte thinks it wasn't a good idea to tell the truth, but Alan says his sister would find out sooner or later, so it's better to explain everything now. He clarifies that Charlotte was exiled for a crime she didn't commit, and that's why he was sheltering her and teaching her unconventional things to enjoy life. Iruka thinks Alan is foolish not for sheltering a wanted girl, but for thinking that sweets and punches are pleasures a girl would enjoy. Charlotte asks if Iruka isn't bothered by the fact that she is considered a criminal. Iruka replies that she's not because it's clear that Alan trusts her. Alan then asks why Iruka came there, and she says she came to take him home, but now also wants to take care of Charlotte and show her the pleasures of life. Alan says he is the best person for that task, but Iruka retorts, saying that there are things that only a woman can show. They start to compete about who is ideal to introduce the world to Charlotte, deciding to settle it through a competition. They take Charlotte to the city, and Alan uses magic to turn her hair black, while Iruka changes her hairstyle to make Charlotte unrecognizable. However, Alan says he will remove the spell when they get home because despite looking good with black hair, he likes her more with blonde hair. The two girls are surprised by Alan's comment. Charlotte blushes with embarrassment, while Iruka thinks he's trying to score points with the girl because of their competition. In reality, Alan is just being honest about what he likes. After changing Charlotte's appearance, Iruka decides to introduce her to the first pleasure of a girl, picking out a pretty outfit. They go to a women's clothing store, making Alan uncomfortable, but he doesn't want to leave Charlotte with his sister and lose their competition. This reminds Alan of when they were children. Iruka always challenged him in chess, and even though she always lost, she never gave up. Alan wonders if that was her way of getting closer to him. At that moment, Iruka calls Alan to show Charlotte's outfit. It was much better than the dress she wore when they first met, but Alan wonders if Charlotte is comfortable, as she probably had never worn such a short outfit before. Indeed, the girl was a bit embarrassed, but Alan notices that she looks healthier now, as she is eating better. At that moment, Alan gets distracted by her skin, and when he realizes what he's doing, he punches himself, momentarily stopping his heart to calm himself down. Charlotte is concerned, but Iruka takes her to try on the next outfit. While the girl is changing, Iruka asks what her brother wants her to do. He replies that he wants to know how the kingdom of Nereus sees Charlotte. She says she'll investigate, thinking it will be easy since their father probably had friends in the kingdom. Iruka asks if she should also investigate the prince and her family, but Alan thinks it's better not to do that for now. He explains that as much as he wants to know more, once he finds out the kind of people they are and how Charlotte was treated, he wouldn't be able to restrain himself, even though he knows Charlotte wouldn't want him to do anything. For that reason, Alan doesn't want to know anything about them for now. His sister comments that he has changed a lot because he used to not care much about others. Suddenly, Charlotte calls Iruka for help to close the back of the dress. She goes to help, but when she gets close, Iruka stares at the girl's back, only saying that such clothes are difficult to close. Charlotte then shows her dress to Alan, and Iruka tells him to take a look at the back. However, it's just a way for her to show her brother that Charlotte's back is covered in scars. He says the dress suits her, analyzing the scars' patterns, deducing they were made with a whip to cause pain and fear. Alan realizes that Charlotte probably doesn't know about the scars, so he decides to be discreet. He uses magic to heal her back and claims he was just fixing a part of the dress that was frayed. However, since the magic was simple, Alan understands that Charlotte had never received proper medical treatment. He realizes that the treatment she received from her family was even worse than he thought, and nothing could justify what they did to her. Alan tells Eruka that he changed his mind about the previous topic. He wants to exterminate them. His sister agrees to help Alan in this task, and Charlotte asks what they are going to exterminate. To spare her from the truth, Alan invents that there's a moth infestation in his parents' house. Charlotte says she doesn't like insects, and Alan adds that he hates them to the point of wanting to vomit, clearly referring to how he feels about her family. To get back to their outing, Eruka asks Alan to choose the next outfit for Charlotte to try. He gets confused and decides to pick any outfit without even looking at it first, resulting in Alan choosing an outfit that's a bit too revealing. His sister takes the chance to tease him about it. After Charlotte tries on several outfits, it's Alan's turn to introduce her to some pleasure. He decides to teach her stress relief through shopping, encouraging her to buy whatever she wants without looking at the prices. Alan picks a store and asks what she wants from there, giving her some options. However, all the options are terrible, and Eruka comments that he has terrible taste. After making several purchases, Charlotte asks them to spend the money on something better than her. Still, Alan insists that the purchases were necessary to teach her one of life's pleasures. He also comments that everything looks great on her, making the girl shy, and Alan doesn't understand why she's blushing. His sister says he's clueless and has terrible taste. Alan is about to question, but Eruka says that's proven by the fact that she chose most of the things they bought because everything Alan liked was bland. They resume their playful arguing, competing to see who is better, but Charlotte is worried. She asks them not to fight, as siblings should get along. They explain that it's not a real fight, just their way of interacting. Still, Charlotte asks them not to fight, and Alan promises not to do it anymore. He then thinks that Eruka was right about him losing the competition, but feels he can't lose as Charlotte's guardian. So Alan decides to continue the shopping spree. On the way, Eruka sees a magical wheelchair and gets excited. Knowing his sister's enthusiasm for magical equipment, Alan decides to leave her there. Eruka becomes so engrossed in the wheelchair that she doesn't notice them leaving without her. Later, Alan enters an accessory store and picks a hairpin that matches Charlotte's eye color. When it's time to pay, he hands over a gold coin, even though the hairpin costs a silver coin. The vendor questions the excessive payment, but Alan says he likes to pay well for a well-done service. He puts the hairpin in Charlotte's hair, saying it's nothing special, but she mentions it's the purchase that made her the happiest, touching Alan's heart. Suddenly, a guy bumps into Charlotte, almost making her fall. To make matters worse, he and his partner are troublemakers and accuse Charlotte of not looking where she's going. Both belong to a group called Gankutsu, which Alan has never heard of. He tries to resolve the situation peacefully, but the guys continue blaming Charlotte, making Alan want to teach them a lesson. However, he remembers that Charlotte asked him not to fight. Because of that, Alan ignores their behavior and apologizes for Charlotte's lack of attention. But the guys don't want to make it easy. They say they'll accept Alan's apology if he lends Charlotte to them for a night. This terrifies Charlotte, but before they can touch her, Alan loses his patience and twists the hand of the one who got close to her. The other tries to attack Alan with a magical sword, but everyone around doesn't know that Alan is a powerful wizard. He quickly handles the sword and then punches the guy. Alan makes it clear to both of them that if they lay a finger on Charlotte, he will turn them into mincemeat. Everyone is impressed by how Alan dealt with the guys, but only then does he realize he broke the promise he made to Charlotte. He apologizes to her for breaking the promise, fearing he might have scared her. But Charlotte explains that despite not liking violence, she knew he was just protecting her and assures him that she will never be afraid of him. This relieves Alan. He remembers that initially he thought Charlotte would want to leave soon because he thought she wouldn't like him. He realizes how relieved he is that it didn't happen and wonders if that was the change his sister noticed in him. Then Alan comments to Charlotte that it seems he's getting addicted to showing her pleasures. Eruka observes them from afar and realizes she lost their competition because when it comes to romance, only Alan can teach Charlotte. Suddenly, a gigantic creature appears, wanting to fight them because of what they did to the two guys who had bothered Charlotte. The golem wonders what to do with this guy. Alan starts approaching, making Charlotte nervous, but he reassures her that everything will be fine. The boy asks if the golem's name is Megath. The creature doesn't understand the significance of the name, but Alan recognizes him as Megath, revealing that they haven't seen each other in a few years. The monster claims not to remember any humans like him, delivering a punch to the ground. The wizard comments on Megath's poor memory and introduces himself as Alan Crawford from the Athena Magic Academy. Upon hearing this, Megath is startled and immediately bows, apologizing and addressing the young man as Daemao, or Great Demon King, if you prefer. Everyone is surprised by this situation, especially Megath's subordinates, who thought he would easily defeat the guy. However, the Golem advises them to stop provoking the wrath of the Demon King. Charlotte is also clueless about what's happening, so Iruka explains that Alan's and her father is the director of the country's largest magic academy, and Alan graduated at the age of 12, becoming the youngest professor in history, showcasing his prodigious talent. The information shocks the princess, while the Golem continues begging for the forgiveness of the Daemao. Iruka then reveals that this was her brother's nickname. Alan mentions that it's been a long time since they called him that and finds it nostalgic. He then tells Megath to stand up as he didn't bother him, but the subordinates wanted to harm Charlotte. During his dialogue, Alan tries to define what the girl means to him. The wizard is unsure but thinks of her as a person living in his house, perhaps his second sister or something similar, but ends up saying she is a precious woman to him. Sometime later, Mage and Iruka approach Alan, noticing he's deep in thought with a melancholic aura. They inquire about what's going on, and at that moment, the boy realizes that the girls have become quite friendly suddenly. Iruka thinks something happened between Alan and Charlotte and confirms. Mage suspects a fight, but he begins to recount what happened. When Alan tried to pay Charlotte for her services, she initially refused, but he reminded her that she was hired, so it's only logical to be paid. The girl doesn't consider herself useful enough to receive payment, but he enumerates everything she does, keeping the house shining and creating a pleasant environment. With Alan's insistence, the girl accepts the money, and he suggests she can save it, but he recommends that she spends it, asking if there's anything she wants to do or buy. Charlotte then thinks of something she would like to do, which is to go to the city alone. Back in the present, Alan says that sending the girl to the city alone is like throwing seasoned meat into a cage of beasts. Despite hearing the whole story, the girls start discussing a pancake shop with fake customers. Alan draws their attention, and Iruka mentions that she didn't expect to hear something like that from Charlotte, as the norm would be for her to restrain herself for fear of being discovered and causing trouble for Alan. With that, he reveals that the girl retracted her request immediately. She apologized and told him to forget what she said. In this situation, the young man told her not to worry because with his magic, there would be no problem. Iruka questions this attitude, but Alan says he couldn't say no after hearing Charlotte speak in that sad manner. Even though the guy makes it sound like a lost cause, the girls agree that this problem can be easily solved. Thus, the three go to the city to keep an eye on Charlotte without being noticed. The girl is disguised and using a map, making Alan proud because he taught her that. When the girls ask why Charlotte wants to visit the city, Alan reveals that she wants to buy something, but he doesn't know what because the blonde said it's a secret. The fact that the girl already has a secret makes the wizard think she's maturing and establishing her personality. He wants her to continue like this and cause even more trouble for him. Meanwhile, the princess keeps walking but seems lost, which would be a problem. Mage comments that the girl is heading in the direction of the Mirror District, which is not very safe. The district is controlled by a group called Serpent Fang. The leader is a man named Grow, who has a serpent. Surprise, surprise. Worried, Iruka suggests pretending they coincidentally saw Charlotte and stopping all of this, but Alan doesn't want to dampen the girl's first adventure. Suddenly, he says he remembered a commitment and moves away across the rooftops. Still following the princess, Miacha comments that she's heading straight for a dangerous location. At a crossroads, she just needs to turn left to reach the Mirror District, and that's exactly what she does. When she arrives in that district, the girl no longer knows where she is, even with the map. Suddenly, Grow and the Serpent Fang appear. But when the duo tries to approach to defend the girl, instead of doing something bad, they welcome Charlotte in a very cheerful way. Neither the princess nor the other two understand anything, and when Alan appears, he explains to Miacha and Iruka that he arrived in this place before them and taught those guys a lesson, taking the opportunity to tell them to be kind to Charlotte when she arrived. At this moment, Miacha comments that the guys really seem beaten up. Charlotte also notices this and ends up giving some magic potions to help the group. Everyone is very moved and recognizes the girl as a goddess. Ro promises to change his lifestyle from that day on, and the rest of the guys follow the same decision. The leader takes the opportunity to ask about Charlotte's relationship with the Daemao. She then asks if the group knows the guy, but they reply that they know one side of him. However, before giving more details, they remember that he also said not to tell anything, so they show even more fear. This makes Iruka realize that the group was well threatened, but Alan says he only showed them one magic trick. To try to determine her relationship with the Demon King, the girl explains that she no longer has a home to return to, and Alan was kind and hired her as a maid, so basically he is her master. The problem is that for Alan, it seemed immoral and obscene. The guys in the group ask if she isn't being deceived or threatened. Even the leader Grow thinks there's some crime going on. Alan gets frustrated but understands that it may seem strange for the scary demon king to be together with a kind goddess. Inside, the boy thinks this girl is too good for him. Meanwhile, Charlotte tells the guys that Alan is actually a kind person, and it must be a misunderstanding. Everything is going well until she mentions that Alan is teaching her various improper things. This shocks everyone, and she even says that one day they spent the whole night doing improper things. The girls question the guy, but he explains that they spent the night playing video games and eating snacks, but he intends to warn her not to talk about it in public. Then the girl says goodbye and goes on her way. Mayacha and Iruka realize that she's going even deeper into the district and may encounter even more dangerous groups. Nevertheless, Alan says there's nothing to worry about because it's easy to resolve. He just needs to take full control of this area. So he defeats groups like the Puppet Mafia and the Lobisto Gang, while Mayacha takes the opportunity to teach a bunch of very bad customers a lesson. The trio takes over the entire area until they surpass all the adventurers in the city. Now Charlotte should be safe. Still, Alan is insecure. Despite his sister mentioning that the princess doesn't want him to know what she's going to buy, Mayacha offers to keep an eye on her alone while the other two wait. Sometime later, Mayacha returns to warn that Charlotte finished her shopping without any problems. Alan praises the good job but questions if everything is really okay without the cat girl watching. She then says that the girl met an acquaintance and is with that person, and they should be arriving soon. Alan takes the opportunity to ask what the girl bought, but Mayacha didn't see because it would be impolite. Soon, Iruka spots Charlotte in the distance, approaching with excitement, coincidentally finding the three in the city. The person accompanying her was a redhead, the owner of a hair accessory store. She says that Alan is truly amazing. Charlotte tells them that on the way they heard many people talking about Alan, saying that the Demon King made the streets safer. The guy doesn't understand at first, but the redhead explains that these unruly adventurers only cause problems for everyone, but they received a lesson, and that helped everyone. Hearing this, Iruka says that he helped the people without even realizing it, and the redhead says she came to thank him on behalf of the entire city. Inside, Alan knows that he only did it for Charlotte's sake, and didn't imagine that other people would thank him. So he says he doesn't need thanks since he did it for personal reasons. The redhead finds him interesting and says that Charlotte is lucky to have chosen him as her boyfriend. This embarrasses both of them, and he immediately clarifies that it's not like that. Then the redhead says goodbye to return to the store. After that, Alan, a bit insecure, asks how the shopping went. Charlotte says everything went well and shows the things she bought. The girls recognize that the packaging is from a recently opened store. Charlotte says they are gifts for Iruka and Mayacha. They are surprised that she visited the city just to buy gifts for them, even with her first salary. Charlotte then says it's because both of them have helped her a lot, so she gives Iruka a plush kitten and Mayacha a new hat. Suddenly, Alan draws the girl's attention and asks if there's nothing for him. She says she searched everywhere for something he might like, but had no idea what could please him. So Alan says that being a gift from her, he would like anything, even if it's something simple like a letter seal, a train photo, a stone, or an insect. The girl apologizes, realizing she should have paid more attention, as she owes him so much. Alan tries to downplay the situation, saying it's not her fault. At that moment, she says she noticed that she only receives things from him all the time, but doesn't know what he really likes, so she wants to fix his kit class, which is a bit worn out, and during that time, he can tell her all the things he likes so that next time she can choose something properly. In this situation, he realizes that a feeling is growing in his chest as the time they spend together becomes increasingly valuable. A few days later, Alan and Charlotte arrived in the Unoha region, a place 3 hours away from their mansion by carriage. Charlotte noticed how beautiful the day was, perfect for a stroll, but they were oblivious to the fact that they were being followed. The day before, Charlotte informed Alan that she had finished reading the book he gave her. She shared how much she had learned about the nation described in the book and how she enjoyed the reading so much that time flew by. Alan explained that reading without worrying about time was a luxury in such a busy society. Charlotte mentioned the interesting places in the book, including the Magic Academy, where Alan and his sister studied together. She was impressed by the size of the place, and Alan explained that, including students, teachers, and staff, its population was almost equal to that of a small island. Alan then asked Charlotte if she was interested in visiting any other place mentioned in the book. As she pondered, realizing that Alan was planning to take her wherever she chose, he confirmed that her choice would determine their destination the next day. This made Charlotte hesitant to reveal her choice, as she thought it might be too much trouble for Alan. He assured her not to worry about causing any trouble, and Charlotte expressed that the time they spent together at the mansion was what she enjoyed the most. She also mentioned that she liked the delay in discovering new things as it made the moments even better, and she feared becoming improper if it happened every day. Alan realized Charlotte had a point, but he didn't want to corrupt her. He just wanted to make her happy by experiencing things she had never encountered before. Alan then asked if Charlotte would be happy with the trip, and as she agreed, he tried to convince her to reveal her preferred destination. He described how it would be a fun trip for both of them, enjoying local cuisine, seeing tourist attractions, or bathing in a hot spring. Despite expressing his willingness to fulfill Charlotte's wish, she still refused to disclose her desired location. Suddenly, Mage arrived and greeted them. Alan asked what she was doing there, considering she had already completed all her deliveries that morning. Mage explained that she returned to deliver a gift for Alan, which turned out to be a trip for two to the Unoha region. And so, Alan and Charlotte embarked on the journey. Charlotte admired the place, noting that her kingdom had many mountains and she had never seen such beautiful flat fields. She shared an incident when she had to hide in a carriage while fleeing guards but couldn't appreciate the view due to the circumstances. Alan regretted bringing up that situation but reassured her that the area was rural, and it seemed her wanted posters hadn't reached there. Therefore, they could enjoy the trip without worries, and Charlotte didn't need to disguise herself, making her very happy. Later, Alan mentioned the townspeople being kind for gifting them the trip. Charlotte asked if it wouldn't have been better for him to take his sister instead of her, but Alan explained that Iruka couldn't make the trip at that time. His sister would be busy in the kingdom of Nuruz investigating Charlotte's family, as Alan had requested. However, that was just an excuse. Iruka and Miecha were following their carriage. They had bought the travel package for them with the gratitude money from the townspeople, attempting to bring Alan and Charlotte closer so their relationship could progress, as it was evident that they liked each other but never took a step forward. At that moment, Charlotte spotted the inn where they would stay, pointing out that it was the most famous inn in the Unoha region as mentioned in her book. Alan checked the book and discovered that the place had hot springs, massages, and delicious food, making customers want to come back. Alan then asked Charlotte if that was the place she wanted to visit, and she agreed, though it was clearly a lie. Knowing Charlotte wasn't being truthful, Alan began to guess which place had truly captured her interest. Charlotte asked him to drop it as she was eager to experience the hot springs. Eventually, she admitted feeling embarrassed to reveal the place she wanted to visit because it was a spot for young children. However, Alan saw it as an opportunity to analyze the options in the book more easily. Despite Charlotte's request to stop guessing, he decided to respect her choice but explained that doing childish things as an adult for not having the opportunity before was enjoyable and fell into the category of improper activities. Alan assured Charlotte that he would never laugh at her for wanting to go to a childish place and mentioned that whenever she felt comfortable sharing, they could go together wherever it was. Later, they reached the inn and greeted the staff. The employee explained that their room was ready and thanked them for choosing the inn for their honeymoon, leaving the two confused. The employee asked if they were just boyfriends, and Alan questioned how she came to that conclusion. She clarified that it was a special package for couples, making Alan finally realize that Miecha had orchestrated a plan, observing them from a distance along with Iruka, happy that they had chosen the best option to bring them closer. Realizing the mistake, the employee suggested they could change the plan, but she warned that the couple's package was the best option. Thinking about Charlotte's happiness, Alan decided to stick with the couple's plan, even though it included embarrassing elements like a shared drink. Later, they headed to the hot springs, one of the most attractive features of the inn and something Charlotte was eager to experience. To fully enjoy this part of the trip, they needed swimwear, and since Charlotte didn't bring any, the employee suggested she could rent a bikini there. As Alan waited for Charlotte to return in a bikini, he admired the surroundings. Despite the employee mentioning it wasn't the peak time for the hot springs, the place was still bustling. Alan thought it would be challenging to see Charlotte in swimwear, but he considered using magic to stop his heart for a moment to resolve the issue. Charlotte returned and Alan tried to stay calm, but just looking at her made his heart stop without the need for magic. Nearby, Miecha and Iruka were still watching from a distance, hoping their plan would bring Alan and Charlotte closer. Blushing at the sight of Charlotte in a bikini, Alan was asked if they matched. He replied that it was the opposite. She looked beautiful in it. Charlotte thanked him and returned the compliment, saying he also looked good in swimwear. The two then set off for various activities at the inn, such as massages, ping pong, and other games. Later, they enjoyed the hot springs with a view of the sea. Meanwhile, Iruka and Miecha grew impatient, as this was the part of the trip where they hoped Alan and Charlotte would draw closer, but they seemed to be only enjoying the view. The employee delivered an ice cream that Alan had ordered for Charlotte. He explained that eating ice cream in the hot springs was a unique experience and used an ice magic spell to keep the ice cream from melting in the heat, allowing Charlotte to savor the moment without hurry. Charlotte was delighted with the ice cream, attracting the attention of others who wanted the same experience. They overwhelmed the employee with orders, and after a while, a man asked Alan if he could enchant his son's ice cream as he did with Charlotte's, as the boy couldn't stop asking to try the super cold ice cream she was having. Alan agreed to enchant the ice cream for anyone who wanted, making the locals celebrate. In the evening, the employee thanked Alan for significantly boosting ice cream sales. She explained that thanks to him, ice cream sales had tripled. Alan didn't find it extraordinary, as it was a simple thing for him, but Charlotte commented that he was an amazing wizard and had made everyone happy with his action. As a thank you gesture, the employee asked if they had decided where they wanted to go the next day, as the inn could make the experience even more special. Alan thanked her for the offer and asked if there were any places they recommended. The employee explained that there were various tourist attractions like diving spots, beaches, and a hill where they could observe Fenrir's noble and peaceful creatures rumored to bring luck to those who saw them. However, she mentioned that it might be a waste of time to go there at that time, as it was precisely when they were busy raising their pups, and they rarely descended the mountain during that period. Charlotte and Alan lamented their bad luck, but the employee suggested another place where they could see magical creatures, the magical zoo of Unoha. Seeing Charlotte excited about that option, Alan decided that they would go there the next day. Later, after enjoying the inn thoroughly, the two went to their room. Despite being quite large, it had a double bed, as they had the couple's plan. The situation made them feel awkward. While outside the room, Iruka and Mage listened, hoping that at least during the night, the two would get closer in some way. Charlotte and Alan decided to sleep together because Alan had tried to change rooms but discovered that the bed had been custom-made by dream demons, allowing the sleeper to choose the dream they would have during the night, which intrigued them as a rare item. They went to sleep, but despite the perfect bed, they had difficulty falling asleep. Alan took the opportunity to ask if Charlotte had decided on the dream she wanted to have, and she replied that she wanted to dream about her mother, as they used to sleep together when she was a child. To help Charlotte fall asleep, Alan cast a gentle hypnosis spell, causing her to fall into a deep sleep in seconds. He began to observe her sleeping, and when he realized what he was doing, he quickly cast a sleep spell on himself, which inadvertently affected Iruka and Miecha, who were still spying from outside. The next day, when Alan woke up, he saw Charlotte emotional and asked if she managed to dream about her mother. Charlotte said yes and shared that she had talked a lot with her in the dream, even mentioning Alan. Alan, who had promised Charlotte's mother to protect her, felt a sense of responsibility. Meanwhile, outside, Iruka and Miecha were still under the influence of the sleep spell. Alan and Charlotte arrived at the magical zoo of Unoha. This is the place Charlotte wanted to go to before, but she was too embarrassed to say. They enter, and inside, there's a variety of magical creatures. Charlotte asks Alan if everything is okay, as she didn't want him to force himself for a selfish request. He reassures her that it's not a problem. He just didn't imagine she liked magical creatures. She points on the map to the area where people can pet the animals. When she was younger, Charlotte read about this area in a book and has always wanted to go to such a place since then. Alan suggests they make the most of their time like children again. He tells her not to hesitate to ask for anything. They'll buy it for her. Charlotte hesitates to make such a request, but Alan, anticipating his usual curse-induced blackmail, encourages her. She asks for 2 cat ear headbands, one for her and one for Alan. In the animal contact corner, Charlotte compliments Alan, saying the headband looks cute. They approach the creatures all calm, but Alan notices a sign warning about hellish capybaras in the region. He gets nervous as these magical creatures are fierce and capable of destroying an entire mountain when hungry. A zoo employee notices Alan's understanding of the matter and assures him that at the moment the capybaras are resting deep in the forest. He asks Charlotte how she's finding it, and she's quietly looking down. Worried, he approaches and asks if something happened. Charlotte is emotional, not because of any problem, but because the creatures are soft, round, and adorable. She cries tears of happiness, never imagining she'd see such a paradise, and she hasn't even petted any of them yet. They go in, and Charlotte promises to pet them with all her heart. Alan is happy for her and decides to lend a hand since it's so important to her. He approaches and talks to some creatures. They ask how he understands them, and he explains his basic knowledge of the language of magical creatures. He tells them his friend likes them a lot and asks if they want to play with her. In return, he'll buy the food they want. The creatures agree, and he calls Charlotte to join them. However, when he looks, she's already surrounded by other creatures, and the ones he bribed run after her too. Other people see Charlotte and are impressed, wondering who the girl so popular with magical creatures is. Later, they sit on a bench, and Charlotte says she enjoyed meeting the creatures. Meanwhile, the creatures are still following Charlotte with looks of passion. She says she became good friends with all of them, and Alan, translating their words, realizes the creatures are ordering him not to dare touch their lady. Alan finds it curious, as even though they are accustomed to humans, this has gone beyond common limits. He recalls finding Charlotte unconscious and surrounded by creatures in the forest. So he tells Charlotte that in that world, some magics and abilities are only possible with innate talents. That's why he's good with magic, having been born with a talent, enabling him to use non-verbal enchantments, a high-level skill. Therefore, Alan thinks maybe she has the talent to be a magical creature tamer, a person who can communicate with and use magical creatures. Since she enchanted those creatures without any training, the chances are high. Charlotte is impressed with the possibility of having such power, and Alan says he can barely communicate with low-level creatures himself. He wonders if that's why she was adored by delinquents in the city. High-level tamers can tame and control high-level beasts, but Alan has never heard of one using their powers on humans. Then a zoo employee rushes to talk to them. She saw that they got along well with many creatures in the animal contact area and asks if they are magical creature tamers. Alan asks what happened, and she pleads for help because they don't know what to do. She takes them to a zoo employee's central, and the zoo director talks to them. He recognizes Alan and asks if he's the son of the Crawfords. The director mentions they met at a public lecture at the Athena Academy of Magic. Relieved, the employees are glad that a Crawford is there to help. The director asks for help with the zoo problem. They go to a room and he shows a fierce and angry magical creature in a cage. The director explains it's a wounded Fenrir separated from its parents and shot by a hunter. It's the first time they capture a Fenrir, and no one on the team can communicate with it, making it challenging to approach and treat the creature. Alan approaches and tries to talk to the Fenrir, assuring it that no one intends to harm it, but it reacts angrily. The director mentions it has been acting like this since they found it, not accepting food, so they don't know if they can wait for it to open up. Alan asks if they have any tamers on the team, but none of them has the level required to deal with the Fenrir. Alan promises to do his best. Then the employee comes in desperate, saying the mother of the cub is coming. Everyone panics because the employees used magic to erase the tracks when they found the cub. They assume the creature must be a high-level Fenrir, over 100 years old. Alan is worried because Fenrirs are known not just for their rarity but also for their pure strength. A Fenrir over 100 years old would be a great threat, capable of easily destroying the entire city. Returning the cub wouldn't be a good idea because, in the mother's eyes, it would be kidnappers. But they can't release it without treating its injuries. So Alan says he'll stop the mother Fenrir. Everyone is concerned because it's very dangerous, but he says it's his specialty. As a precaution, he asks them to evacuate all visitors from the park. He plans to ask Charlotte to leave the city as well, but she says she can't stand still and do nothing. She asks to try talking to the cub, promising to run away if it gets too dangerous. Alan is pleased with Charlotte's change, standing up to save people. Even though he managed earlier to tame all creatures in the contact area without magic, it would be much harder with a creature like a Fenrir. However, Alan decides to trust Charlotte. He asks the boss to let Charlotte talk to the cub while he deals with others coming toward the zoo. Even though they've done various things before, this would be the first time Alan and Charlotte act as a team. On the edge of the pool, the security department of Resort Yunoha advises all customers to go to a safe place as Fenrirs are coming their way. Mayacha and Iruka get angry because this happens just when they are enjoying a vacation. However, they relax knowing the Demon King is there and won't let anything bad happen. Right on time, Alan appears behind them, saying he already knew they were following the two. Outside, the pack of Fenrirs is approaching. Alan then summons a protective barrier at Resort Yunoha. To buy time for Charlotte to convince the cub, Alan uses his Ice Bond's magic to trap the Fenrirs on the ground. However, the ground begins to crack, and the mother Fenrir emerges, a giant creature. She devours Alan, but he uses his paralyzed magic to get out alive. He tries to talk to the creature, but it doesn't work, and she hits him with her tail, throwing Alan far away. Then Alan's about to use his magic against the mother Fenrir, but the hellish capybara that was watching him before appears and tells him not to do it. If he harms the mother, the cub won't be able to reunite with her, making the girl sad. The capybara introduces itself as Gosetsu, saying its goal is to rescue the girl forced to stay with him. Alan asks how he knows her, and Gosetsu says that after escaping the magical zoo and wandering through various places, he met a maiden named Charlotte. He found her unconscious in the forest, but then Alan appeared. So Gosetsu started observing Charlotte in secret, and the more it observed, the more convinced it became that she was a good girl and the rumors about her were false. Therefore, to protect Miss Charlotte, it was necessary to eliminate Alan. The mage mocks Gosetsu, saying it's basically jealousy, but the capybara gets furious and shoots a fireball at him. Alan manages to block the attack with his magic. Then, Gosetsu goes after the mage and they start fighting. Alan asks what the capybara intends to do, and it says it will use the seal power within it to defeat Alan and then destroy the kingdom of Niras. That nation was the cause of Miss Charlotte's pain, so it would turn everything into ashes. Gosetsu uses its power and shoots flames, melting the ice that trapped the Fenrir's. It reveals that it told the Fenrir's that Alan kidnapped the cub. Alan is cornered. He needs to face the Fenrir's, the mother Fenrir, and the hellish capybara. Even if he uses all this power, it will be challenging to get out of this unharmed. Then the magical creatures from the zoo arrive, commanded by Charlotte, who is riding the cub Fenrir. She says she worked hard to talk to him, and he eventually accepted the treatment. Alan is impressed with how much she has evolved and then asks about the other creatures. She says that when she went to find him, all of them followed her, worried about her safety. She now understands what they say, not completely, but enough to get an idea of their communication. Alan is impressed, considering it took him half a year to learn just the basic language of magical creatures. With proper training, she could become a magical creature tamer with a level comparable to his. Meanwhile, the cub returns to the mother Fenrir. Alan asks Charlotte what they are talking about, and she says that Gosetsu told a lie that he was the illegal hunter. The capybara tries to convince Charlotte to go with him, saying Alan will only bring her more pain and suffering. Alan helped her hide from her nation instead of seeking revenge, leading her down the path of corruption. Charlotte gets nervous and responds that Mr. Allen gave her days of peace where she didn't have to feel afraid. With him, she truly began to live, and if Gosetsu speaks ill of him, she won't forgive him. Then Gosetsu becomes enraged and says you will need to take Charlotte by force, so he concentrates all his power and rushes toward her. However, Alan stands in front and faces the capybara again. Gosetsu shoots fireballs, but the mage dodges and they clash with their powers. However, Alan's powers are greater, and he manages to defeat the capybara with a punch. Gosetsu is thrown to the ground with great force and gets hurt, and Alan checks if he's okay. He feels guilty and admits to overdoing it, so he uses his powers to heal the enemy. Gosetsu acknowledged that was a good punch, revealing Alan's true intentions. Seeing what the two felt for each other, it would be rude for him to interfere. Alan, puzzled, asked what he was talking about, and Gosetsu pointed to his head as evidence. Alan then realized he still had the cat ear headband on, feeling embarrassed and attempting to explain. Later, the hotel employee thanked Alan and Charlotte for saving the puppy. Alan credited it all to Charlotte, telling her she could be proud. The employee thanked Charlotte, expressing gratitude that now everyone could see the Fenrirs run happily again. Speaking of which, the mother Fenrir and her pups appeared to bid farewell to Charlotte, leaving the employee astonished as she had never seen these creatures up close in her 200 years. Charlotte then remembered and was about to tell Alan where the hunters were when Mayacha and Aruka appeared with the hunters in custody. Alan explained he found them at the resort and asked the two to apprehend them. Charlotte wondered why they were at the resort, and the two tried to play it off. As Alan spoke with the hunters, he noticed none showed any remorse. Therefore, he decided to let the Fenrirs take care of them. However, Alan used his magic to enhance the hunters' defense, making them relieved. Alan revealed he did it so the Fenrirs could have more fun playing with them. After a few days of enjoying the trip, Alan and Charlotte get ready to head back home. However, the Fenrir pup insists on joining them because he wants to stay close to the girl. She asks if he won't miss his family, but both the pup and his mother seem at ease with his departure. The employee explains that they are calm because if Fenrir takes less than an hour to reach the region where Alan is, and since it's not a long journey, it would be like a lodging for the pup. So Alan agrees to take the animal with them, making both the Fenrir and Charlotte excited. He says it won't be a bother since his mansion is quite large with plenty of places for the pup to roam, and it's good for the family to grow. Charlotte realizes that Alan was including her as part of the family. He says it's obvious that he already considers her family. The girl blushes at the comment and Alan doesn't understand why, making Aruka and Mayaka think about how clueless he is. Later, they all get into the carriage to leave, but the Fenrir is not the only animal that wants to come along. Gosetsu insists on joining them as he wants to be Charlotte's bodyguard. She asks who he is, and the capybara replies that he is her family. Alan gets annoyed with Gosetsu and tells him to go back to the zoo, but he refuses to leave. And so they all set off together, and the hotel employee shouts for the couple to return to the hotel when they are on their real honeymoon. A few days later, we see that Charlotte named the Fenrir Lou. She tells Alan that she will take the pup for a walk, and he asks the little one to protect the girl, but the animal clearly ignores him. Since the trip to the Unoha region, Lou has become part of the family, along with Gosetsu, who points out to Alan that he has less time to spend with Charlotte now that they are living together in the mansion. Alan asks Gosetsu how long he plans to stay, and the capybara insists that he's not going anywhere, as he is Charlotte's family. He says Alan shouldn't be so cold with him since they both love Charlotte equally. Alan admits to himself that he is indeed sad to have less time with Charlotte, but despite that, he is happy that she has finally found a purpose in becoming a magical creature tamer. On the night they returned from the trip, Charlotte explained that she wanted to study to become a tamer, and Alan noticed that she was different. When Charlotte arrived at his mansion, she spent her time counting the wooden grains on the floor, but now she seemed determined and hopeful. So Alan promised to teach her everything she needed to become a creature tamer. Since then, she has proven to be an excellent and dedicated student who learns quickly. Charlotte spends her nights reviewing and preparing materials, and Alan acknowledges that she is a brilliant and motivated student who is always eager to research on her own. Furthermore, Alan feels that since Charlotte started studying to be a creature tamer, he discovers a new side of her every day. Charlotte tests what she learned on Lu, casting an enchantment on the pup that makes him follow a path exactly as she wishes. Alan is impressed to see how Charlotte has already mastered that technique and comments that he doubts there is another tamer as good at communicating with Fenmers as she is. He says he expected nothing less from his dear student, and Gosetsu remarks that he said that just as an excuse to call Charlotte dear, making Alan nervous. He tells the capybara to go back to the zoo, but as always, Gosetsu refuses, saying his place is there. Charlotte gives a bone to Elu as a reward, and Alan decides to pat the animal to congratulate him too. However, the pup immediately tries to bite his hand. Charlotte scolds Elu, saying he can't bite people, leaving the pup all sad. But Alan says it's okay after all, he managed to pull his hand away in time. He says that Lu's behavior only shows that the pup has let Charlotte build a bond of trust, proving her taming skills. The capybara agrees with Alan and says that the girl has reached the level of practicing bestial conversation. Charlotte recalls reading about it in a book, a magic that replaces the language of magical creatures linked to the tamer with human language, allowing the creature to communicate. This reminds Charlotte and Alan that for some unknown reason, Gosetsu could speak their language, and the capybara explains that he has lived for so long that he learned the human language. Alan then realizes that he never heard of bestial conversation working on Fenmers and thinks it might be too early to try such magic. However, Charlotte is so excited about the idea of talking to Lilu that she decides to give it a try. She casts the bestial conversation spell, and initially they think it didn't work. But as soon as Alan puts his hand on Charlotte's shoulder to comfort her, the pup tells him to take his hand off his mom. Charlotte is thrilled that the magic worked, and the pup also celebrates being able to talk to his mom. The capybara says he always knew Charlotte was a special girl, and Alan agrees with him. Despite that, the pup still makes it clear that he doesn't like Alan at all. Later, Alan makes a bathtub for Elu to take a bath as a reward for being able to talk to Charlotte. The girl asks the pup to thank Alan. He obeys, although it's clear he's doing it against his will. Charlotte asks Elu to thank properly, but Alan says there's no need and asks the two to enjoy the bathtub. At that moment, Alan sees that Gosetsu is already inside enjoying the water without asking for permission. He says the bathtub is unlimited for Fenmers and humans, making it clear he doesn't want a capybara in there. Charlotte and Elu get into the bathtub and have fun, while Gosetsu says that if a capybara is not allowed in the bathtub, he has to take action. Then, Gosetsu unleashes a secret transformation technique called Hell Forest Rat Style. He transforms into a woman, surprising everyone. Gosetsu explains that this transformation technique was his way of enjoying human gourmet restaurants, but what shocks Alan is the discovery that the creature was female all along. Afterward, they enjoy a day in the bathtub, except for Alan, who stays outside enjoying the peaceful moment. He thinks that days like that could last forever and notices Charlotte. Immediately, his heart starts changing its beats, and he doesn't understand why. Shortly after, Charlotte decides to leave the bathtub. As the animals still want to stay in the water a bit longer, she stays with Alan and takes the opportunity to thank him for everything he has done for her. Alan says there's no need for so much formality and explains that he can even make a slow river pool for her. Charlotte says she can imagine something like that, as the space there is quite large and spacious. He explains that the previous owner of the mansion was an elf, and he didn't know what to do with all that space, so he ended up doing nothing. However, Alan says he didn't get to know him because the elf disappeared 30 years ago. He tells that he heard the elf was very antisocial, never went to town, and spent his days sitting at his office table. However, one day he simply disappeared and was never seen again. Some said the elf jumped off the cliff because of his failed experiments. Others say he was devoured by a monster he created, while others said his body was taken over by mushrooms, and he wanders the region to this day. That story scares Charlotte, and Alan explains that thanks to the rumors about the elf's disappearance, he was able to buy the mansion at a great price. Then they see a bunch of mushrooms in the bathtub. Charlotte is trembling with fear, but as they approach, they see that everything is fine, despite the mushrooms mysteriously appearing in the water. Suddenly, an elf comes out of the basement, asking who stole her mushrooms. Then, Alan and Charlotte go down to the basement to talk to the elf. She apologizes for the scare and introduces herself as Dorothy Grimm. Alan notices that she has been living in the basement for a long time, and Charlotte thinks the elf is a ghost. Dorothy asks who they are, and Alan explains that they live in the mansion. However, the elf reveals that she is the owner of the place, and Alan understands that she is the elf who disappeared 30 years ago. The three then go upstairs to continue the conversation. Dorothy comments that she never imagined rare magical creatures living in the mansion, and Gosetsu notices that the girl is a dark elf, a rare type of elf belonging to the elite. The capybara explains that they are almost mythological beings, able to survive without eating or drinking anything for 100 years, nourishing themselves only with the magical power of the air. Alan thinks that now they have a Fenrir, a hell capybara, and a dark elf, and he bets that no one has ever seen these three creatures together in one place. He then wonders what led Dorothy to hide for 30 years and worries about how the property rights would be since the previous residents still lived there. However, Alan knew there was no better place for Charlotte and her magical creatures, so he decides to take action to solve the problem. He then asks Dorothea if she would consider selling the mansion, and she accepts the proposal. The elf preferred to live in the basement, so Alan and the others could use the mansion as they pleased. However, she explains that she didn't need money and would like to propose another form of payment as she needed help. Alan thinks it would be easier to solve it with money, but Charlotte shows concern for Dorothea and wants to help her in any way she can. Gosetsu and Eld also say they want to help, but the elf says she only needs Alan and Charlotte. Inside the mansion, Dorothy tells a bit of her story. The elf used to write books of all genres and considered herself a writing genius. However, when she tried to write a romance, she suffered from writer's block. So as the deadline for the book approached, Dorothy felt cornered and fled to the basement, where she spent the last 30 years. Alan thinks the reason for her disappearance is silly and begins to say that he doesn't see how he could help. However, the elf quickly convinces him to continue listening to her proposal, where she won't hand over her mansion. Dorothea then continues her explanation. She wanted to make the world happy with her writing and explains that as soon as she met Charlotte and Alan, she got shivers because she felt their personalities could inspire her writing. The elf mentions that the two are perfect for a story since they have very distinct personalities. While he is bossy and arrogant, she is kind and delicate. So Dorothy finally reveals that the favor she needs is for the two to act as lovebirds to inspire her to write her romance novel. And so Alan and Charlotte perform in a play inspired by Romeo and Juliet. He holds the girl in his arms and they gaze at each other. However, Dorothea, who was directing the play, interrupts the scene, questioning why Alan was holding Charlotte with magic. He explains that he feels embarrassed to physically carry her, but the elf complains that he isn't acting as he should. After Alan and Charlotte promise to help Dorothy find inspiration for her romance novel, she realizes that they struggle to act sweetly towards each other. To remedy this, she prepares a script for them to follow. The elf scolds Alan for not following the script correctly, and he regrets agreeing to help her. Dorothy explains that they shouldn't be having difficulty, as all they have to do is flirt, mentioning that she didn't even include a kissing scene in the script. Both feel awkward, and the elf continues to explain that they just need to follow what she wrote to assist in writing her book and secure the mansion, benefiting everyone. Alan thinks he has to do it to regain his home, but considering that Charlotte might also dislike acting, he refuses to continue. Alan says it's impossible for Charlotte to flirt with a guy she doesn't like, but she responds that if it's him, she doesn't mind. This makes Alan freak out, and he forcefully hits his head against the wall to calm down. Charlotte becomes concerned, and Gosetsu comments that at that moment, they were naturally flirting. Dorothy gets excited, seeing that the capybara was indeed right, but then she becomes disheartened, realizing that if the two are responsible for developing a romance, even she, an elf, would die of old age. Because of this, Dorothy insists that they simply follow the script. Alan, seeing Charlotte making an effort, thinks he also has to do his best and agrees to continue the performance as long as there's nothing in the script violating public order and morality. Gosetsu then offers to help the elf assist the lovebirds, and despite Lulu remaining jealous and thinking Charlotte should be his alone, he also agrees to lend a hand, finding the whole situation amusing. So Dorothea hands a new script for them to memorize, and Alan is shocked to see that in the new story, he and Charlotte are newlyweds. Later, the elf directs the scenes, taking on the role of a true director. Alan acts as if he were a husband returning home after a day of work, but Dorothea nitpicks and tells Alan to improve his performance and act more naturally. He explains that it's difficult to act naturally when he knows he's being watched, but she reminds them that if they don't cooperate, they'll end up without the mansion. Immediately, he promises to act better and follows the script, entering the house to be greeted by his wife, who was eagerly awaiting his return. Charlotte acts so well as the wife that it stirs Alan's heart once again. Next, she follows the story Dorothy provided, asking Alan if he wants dinner, a bath, or her. Unable to handle the situation, Alan once again ruins the script, and Dorothy scolds him again. Charlotte asks if she did something wrong, but Alan clarifies that the mistake was Dorothy's for writing her lines that way. He then makes it clear to the elf that she is forbidden from making Charlotte say weird things like that. Alan thinks that if it weren't for the mansion, this absurdity wouldn't be happening. However, with no other choice, Dorothy resumes directing her play. He and Charlotte continue the story, acting as newlyweds. The girl serves them the dinner she made, and Alan thinks about how excellent an actress she is because she doesn't seem like she's acting. Then, Charlotte takes a spoonful of food to feed him, and Alan blushes but keeps calm, following the script and trying to act normally. However, Charlotte asks if he liked the food, calling him Little Alan. Immediately, he spits out his dinner, once again disrupting the story. Dorothy was losing patience, and Alan questions why she put nicknames in the script. The elf explains that as newlyweds, it's natural for them to have nicknames, revealing that he would call Charlotte Chi. Alan isn't too fond of the situation, but he accepts it, thinking it would help her write her book, even though he feels she's just messing with them. Dorothy decides to end the newlyweds story and move on to the next one, which requires more characters. Gosetsu immediately volunteers to help and reveals his human form to the elf for the first time, surprising her just as much as Alan. Then Love also says he wants to help, and the elf decides to start the new script. In this role, Alan plays a lone delinquent whose childhood friend Charlotte gets kidnapped by criminals. To rescue the girl, Alan enters the enemy territory alone, where Gosetsu and Olu take on their roles. Alan confronts them, finally following the script, and Gosetsu asks him to join his gang, revealing that was the reason for the kidnapping. Alan refuses the offer, and the capybara asks if he doesn't care about what will happen to Charlotte. Immediately, Alan forgets it's just acting and attacks them with his magic, leaving Gosetsu and Eld completely disoriented. He continues following his role, saving Charlotte and saying that he didn't want to fight. The girl follows her line, saying it's okay because he did it just to protect her. This scene reminds Alan of when he fought to protect Charlotte from some troublemakers in the city, and she understood the situation, saying she would never be afraid of him. He returns to his role, continuing the script, trying to remember what he should do at that moment, but getting distracted by Charlotte once again, realizing that everything about the girl affects his heart. Gosetsu then follows his lines, asking what Charlotte is to him, since invading enemy territory to save her is no small feat. Alan starts thinking about what Charlotte means to him, but decides to stick to the script, considering it's just acting. Alan responds that he is Charlotte's guardian, and therefore it's his duty to stay by her side to protect her. However, Dorothy interrupts the scene because Alan was supposed to answer that she's a part of his heart. Still, he explains that he improvised because he thought it would sound better that way. The elf doesn't like the change, but eventually accepts it to continue. Alan starts to reflect that he likes Charlotte, but he can't declare his feelings because he knows how kind she is. If he confesses, she'll feel obligated to reciprocate his feelings. Later, Dorothy announces that the next script will be a version of Cinderella's story. Alan begins to question, saying he's tired of acting, but Charlotte comments that she's having fun, making him change his mind instantly. She then asks if she's acting well, being her first time as an actress. Dorothy says she's perfect and hands them the next script, explaining who will play which characters. And so Charlotte acts as Cinderella, a girl mistreated by her stepmother every day. This scene makes her remember her past before moving to Alan's house when her daily routine was cleaning the Duke's mansion. The story unfolds with Gosetsu playing the stepmother, demanding impeccable cleaning from Cinderella, and displaying her invitation to the royal ball. Charlotte follows the script, becoming sad and wishing for a different life, not even meaning to act. Then Lou appears as the fairy godmother, giving Charlotte a dress for the ball. The story continues in another setting, with the stepmother getting irritated seeing Cinderella arrive at the ball and meet the prince. Charlotte notices how handsome Alan looks in that outfit, and he follows his lines, inviting her to dance. In the middle of a scene with a fake crowd to resemble a ballroom, they start dancing while Charlotte feels her heart beating fast, realizing it always happens when she's near Alan. After the romantic dance, the elf ends the performance because they've completed all the scenes in that setting. She praises Charlotte as a perfect princess while stating that Alan was acceptable. He questions Dorothea because that time he followed the script perfectly. However, despite acting well, only Charlotte receives compliments and pampering, with Lou and Gosetsu saying she was the best actress and giving her water to refresh. Alan asks for a glass of water too, but Lou, as always, ignores him, showing that he still doesn't like him. Then Charlotte offers her water to Alan, saying she doesn't mind sharing the same glass, but he blushes and ends up refusing the water. Later, Dorothea says they are approaching the final scene of the story and starts explaining how everything will happen. However, during the explanation, Charlotte becomes distracted by Alan, looking at him without realizing it. And so they return to acting their characters, reaching the scene where the prince searches for Cinderella through her glass slipper. Instead of the slipper, Alan brings the hair accessory he gave to Charlotte. The stepmother tries to deceive the prince, claiming the accessory is hers, but Alan insists it can't be hers because he's looking for the girl with eyes the color of that accessory. He hands it to Charlotte, following his lines, promising to always protect the princess. Charlotte thinks that Alan indeed always protected her and wonders why. She improvises and asks the prince what he feels for her. Alan contemplates what he should say, trying to understand his feelings for Charlotte better. After thinking for a while, he begins to respond when suddenly they are interrupted by a disturbance. A man broke through the mansion wall, apologizing for the intrusion. He is Dorothea's editor and is furious because she disappeared after he asked for a draft of her book. He explains that he was surprised by her disappearance, and the elf boasts of sealing the basement in a way that even an experienced master like him couldn't detect her presence. However, her editor says they wouldn't have lost 30 years of life if she had focused her energy on her book instead of hiding. The man then pays Alan to repair the damage, forcibly takes his writer away, and leaves on a dragon. Only after the confusion, Alan realizes he was suffocating Charlotte because he held her in his arms to protect her from the broken wall. Charlotte then asks what he was saying before the man entered the mansion, but Alan feels so embarrassed that the girl asks him to forget it. Suddenly, Eruca appears in distress, stating they have a problem because Charlotte's younger sister, Natlia, is in trouble. When Charlotte lived with her family, she worked as a housemaid, even hurting her hands from cleaning the house so much. She was taken in by the Evans family after the loss of her mother and was mistreated even by the housemaids who couldn't see Charlotte as one of their employer's relatives. However, despite everyone mistreating her, her younger sister, Natlia, treated her with kindness, providing medicine for the wounds on her hands. The girl also asked Charlotte to read to her and refer to her by name when they were alone, instead of addressing her as Miss, as the family requested Charlotte to do, trying her best to become close to her as a sister should be. And so after discovering that Natlia was in danger, Charlotte travels to her on a ship, accompanied by Eruca, Alan, and the two magical creatures. Eruca explains to Alan that Natlia is Charlotte's half-sister and the legitimate heir to the family. Eruca also reveals that from what she found out, Natlia was Charlotte's only ally in the kingdom of Nurus. At that moment, the girl appears and explains that she would like Alan to know what Natlia is like. Lu and Gozetsu also appear to listen. Eruca realizes that she was only away for a few days and Charlotte and Alan were already living with a Fenrir and a hellish capybara. She comments that her mother would be thrilled to meet the two animals, as she is the best expert in magical creature research. Later, they realize they have reached their destination, but they are not in the kingdom of Nurus because Natlia was on the island where Alan and Eruca studied magic. Charlotte asks where the academy is, deducing it to be a building from the ship's view, but Alan explains that it is the students' dormitory, and in fact, the entire island is the Athena Academy of Magic. They enter the island, and Eruca explains that most people there are connected to the school, except for tourists. Lu and Gozetsu ask why Natlia wasn't in the kingdom of Nurus, and Alan also expresses curiosity. But Eruca says she would explain better when they reach her parents' house, assuring them that Natlia was indeed on the island. Charlotte is worried about meeting their parents and fears not making a good impression, but Eruca reassures her, saying that she just needs to be herself and explains that she is more concerned about her brother. 3 years ago, Alan left the academy without telling anyone and left home after a fierce argument with his father. Eruca reveals that everyone on the island still talks about it, as it was two extraordinary wizards facing each other for 3 whole days, leaving the place in ruins, becoming almost a tourist attraction. They continue on the path, and Gosetsu admires Alan for putting aside his bad relationship with his father for Charlotte's sake. He reveals that he actually has a good relationship with his uncle and communicates with him through letters. Charlotte admits feeling a bit envious because she never had a family to argue with, but Alan reminds them that they were going to see Natlia, and the two could create a relationship where they could argue. Nevertheless, Charlotte remains concerned, thinking that she probably caused problems for her sister when she became a fugitive. Alan says that since the accusations were false, Natlia should understand the situation, but he would be there to help in any case. The magical creatures immediately crush the guy to tell Charlotte that they would also be by her side. Eruca also gives her support, stating that surely her parents would too. Charlotte thanks everyone when suddenly they hear a fight. Nearby, a fishman was arguing with a guy, and Alan says that such fights were common on the island. Then they see a man approaching. He passes through the crowd watching the fight and tries to pacify the situation. However, as the two involved don't seem willing to stop fighting, the man easily freezes them with his magic. Charlotte watches everything and finds that Mage incredible, realizing that in a way he resembled Alan. Eruca calls the man and he quickly transports himself near them, greeting Alan and Eruca. Later, the Mage thanks Charlotte for coming and introduces himself as Harvey Crawford's, Alan and Eruca's father. Already at their house, Harvey comments that he is happy to see that his son is well and with such a pleasant girlfriend like Charlotte. Alan begins to explain that the girl is not his girlfriend, but realizes that his sister was responsible for that mistake. He thinks that Iruka may have lied to avoid them asking too much about Charlotte and decides to keep up the lie. Alan then tries to wink at the girl to signal that she should do the same, and despite not being able to wink properly, Charlotte understands the message and introduces herself as his girlfriend. Harvey comments that she is so polite that she is almost too good for his son, but Charlotte explains that Alan is very kind to her and is always teaching her inappropriate things. The father misunderstands the situation, and Alan asks Charlotte not to talk about such things because clearly the girl had no idea what people would think. Later, Harvey tells Charlotte that she can count on him for anything, even considering him as a father, and Alan wonders what Iruka told him. Harvey then brings up the subject of marriage, making the two automatically blush with embarrassment. The mage is surprised they hadn't thought about getting married and asks if their relationship was just for fun. However, Alan immediately says it wasn't. His father is pleased and suggests that if he's thinking of settling down, he should reconsider his offer. Alan immediately refuses to go back to his parents' house as he's now with Charlotte and would continue living in their current residence. Harvey asks his son to consider the idea calmly, and Gosetsu inquires about the offer they were discussing. Iruka explains that Alan's father is the director of the Athena Academy of Magic and wanted Alan to take over his position. The capybara says that being the director of such a prestigious institution like the Academy would be such an honor that it would make his name go down in history books. However, Alan remarks that a title often comes with baggage and he wouldn't want to be tied down like that. Harvey insists, stating that Alan, being his son, is the only one who could inherit the Academy. Charlotte sees Harvey as a wonderful father to Alan, but he tells her not to believe those words as his father actually wanted him to inherit the position for his own benefit. At this moment, a girl appears and Charlotte thinks she's a younger sister of the family, but Alan clarifies that she's not his sister but his aunt. Immediately, the girl throws a fork at the wall, narrowly missing Alan. She scolds him, telling him to call her mom. Then she introduces herself to Charlotte as Lissalot Crawfords. Alan takes the opportunity to explain that the reason his father wants to step down is that he wants to spend more time with his mother. Harvey admits that while being the Academy director is an honor, he wants to pass everything on to his son to retire and spend every day with his beloved wife, even joking that it might be time for them to have another child. Alan starts arguing with his father, and Lissalot apologizes to Charlotte for their loud family. However, she says that it just proves how close they are. Lissalot thanks Charlotte, saying that she's already like a daughter to them. Then Alan asks them to share what they know about Charlotte's sister. Harvey says that she is currently studying at the Academy because the Evans family seemed to be in trouble, and while they sorted things out, the girl took refuge on the island under the pretext of a study exchange, a common story among noble family children. Natalia had been at the Academy for 3 months but was using a false identity. Therefore, it was only recently discovered that she was Charlotte's sister. Alan thinks that the girl probably hid her identity because of Charlotte's escape. Harvey continues explaining that he didn't contact them just because he found out about Natalia's identity, but because of the increasing rivalry between the Academy factions, which was also the reason for the earlier fight they witnessed. Alan doesn't understand what that has to do with Natalia, and his father decides it's better to show. He goes to a magical device, a mirror called the Mirror of Longing, which shows other places. Through it, they see Natalia surrounded by various creatures. Charlotte and Alan get worried and consider running to help the girl, but before they act, they realize that those are Natalia's henchmen. She complains that she asked them to bring her a yakisoba bread, and a lizard man apologizes, explaining that they had to buy another because her order had already run out. Harvey then explains that even though Natalia had only been at the Academy for 3 months, she had grown at an extremely rare rate and started reigning over all the factions. He says he could force a solution, but he wants the students to learn freely and comfortably. Harvey also mentions that Alan should get along well with Natalia since he was quite a troublemaker when he studied at the Academy. Alan complains that they rushed there thinking the girl was in danger. Charlotte despairs at the thought that her sister is now a bad person, but Harvey asks her to keep watching the mirror to see that Natalia is not actually evil. In it, the henchmen lament not getting the yakisoba bread, and the lizard man gives her the change from the purchase. Natalia tells them to keep the change, even though it's 30 silver coins, knowing that the lizard man is taking on many extra shifts at work because he needs money for his family. He tries to refuse the help, but Natalia insists, saying that if she can't do anything for her henchmen, she wouldn't be a good leader. He cries for the girl's kindness, and everyone seems to like and respect her. Alan comments that he wouldn't expect anything less from Charlotte's sister, while she feels relieved to see that Natalia is still kind, admitting that she never thought of her as the type to have henchmen. Hardy reports the situation to the Evans family, but they were so disordered that they didn't seem able to solve the problem, Because of that, he called Charlotte and Alan to talk to Natalia and ask her to take her studies more seriously. Alan thinks it's not so bad since the girl was just misbehaving but decides to help. Alan asks Charlotte what she would like to do, advising her to maybe observe the situation a bit more, but if she wants, she can meet her sister while hiding her identity with magic. Charlotte says that, aside from the few times she read to Natalia, she never did anything an older sister would typically do, but still the girl always called her little sis. That's the only good memory she has of her home, and that's why she wants to meet Natalia. Lou and Gozetsu say they will accompany Charlotte, and Alan asks his father to arrange a false identity for her so she can infiltrate the academy as his assistant. However, that would have to wait until the next day since it was already very late. Alan begins to say that he found a place nearby for them to spend the night, but Liselot mentions that she has already prepared a room for everyone to sleep, insisting they spend the night there for Charlotte's safety. Alan is forced to agree that his parents' house is better for Charlotte's security, but his mother presents the room they will sleep in with a double bed since they are a couple. Alan questions the bed and his mother asks if he lied about their relationship, threatening her son if he lied to her. Obviously, Alan says they are a couple, leaving them no choice but to take that room. They feel awkward until Charlotte suggests they go to bed soon since they have to wake up early the next day. Alan and Charlotte can't seem to fall asleep in the same bed. He apologizes for putting them in that situation and mentions that he wouldn't have confirmed their relationship if he had known it would come to this. This reminds them of a similar situation at the hotel, and Alan thinks that he just needs to use the sleep magic as he did back then. He casts his sleep spell, but it doesn't work. After several unsuccessful attempts, Alan realizes that the bed is made of anti-magic material, something only his sister could create. Iruka, in the next room with Gosetsu, overhears the conversation and is ready to enjoy the couple's predicament since, without sleep magic, they won't easily escape this situation as they did at the hotel. As the two struggle to fall asleep, Charlotte decides to start a conversation. She comments on how well his parents get along, but Alan doesn't see it as a good thing, as it's the reason he's practically being forced into his father's role. Charlotte insists they're an ideal couple, leading Alan to imagine himself and Charlotte acting lovey-dovey like his parents with nicknames and cuddling. Blushing at the thought, he asks if he should act more like his uncle. Charlotte clarifies she didn't mean that, and Alan realizes he said it out loud. Both embarrassed, Alan mentions they don't need to go that far since they're just pretending. Charlotte seizes the moment to ask what he was going to tell her when they were finalizing the skits for Dorothea. Alan recalls her asking about his feelings and contemplates whether to tell the truth. Charlotte wonders about her actions after receiving his response. They both dream of waking up together every morning, having breakfast, going for walks, shopping, and experiencing new things, ending the day with sweet dreams to repeat all the next day. However, Alan hesitates to confess his feelings, thinking it would be selfish, especially as Charlotte is just beginning to walk her own path. Charlotte believes she has no right to desire these things as a wanted person, fearing it would bring trouble to Alan. Consequently, they say nothing. Just as Alan considers speaking up, Charlotte apologizes for bothering him with a question, suggesting they go to sleep since they have an early morning. Iruka limits her investment in the anti-magic bed, deciding to visit their room. Gozetsu stops her, and the noise attracts Liselot, who threatens her daughter with a fork. The next day, Alan and Charlotte, sleep-deprived, use magic to change her appearance, adding glasses. Alan pretends it's a precaution because Natalia knows her, but Gosetsu and Lou realize he did it because he likes glasses and wanted to see her wear them. Later, they head to the Athena Academy of Magic and find Natalia. Alan approaches and she quickly assesses the positions of her allies, shifting her weight for a battle stance, surprising him with her progress after only 3 months at the academy. He then introduces himself, claiming to be a temporary substitute teacher. Natalia recognizes the surname Alan, the same as the director, and her allies start trembling with fear. They explain that Alan was the most malicious student in the history of the academy, and all the teachers and students who opposed him were knocked out in a matter of seconds. He even managed to destroy an entire mountain in a 3-day fight with the director himself, earning him the title of the Great Demon King. Alan regards all of this as a compliment, and Natalia asks who the girl with him is. The wizard introduces Charlotte as his assistant, Charlo, and she shyly says it's a pleasure to meet Natalia. Next, the girl asks what the two wanted with her, and Alan explains that he received a request from the director to instruct problematic students. He asks Natalia to consider him as a private tutor, but she says she doesn't need help and asks to be left alone, walking away with her allies. Alan was expecting a similar reaction in their first encounter and asks what Charlotte thought. However, as he looks at her, he realizes the girl is crying, moved by finally having a conversation with her sister. Alan thinks they barely spoke, but tells Charlotte to prepare herself because they will talk much more in the future, have fun, eat together, and even argue from time to time. This only makes her cry even more, attracting the attention of the students who misunderstand and start judging Alan for making the girl cry. Later, they go to Natalia's classroom, where she was studying advanced magic. Alan is surprised that the girl already understands that material, but Natalia not only understands it but also corrects the teacher, who wrote the wrong formula on the board. The teacher apologizes for the distraction, and Charlotte finds Natalia incredible because, while she didn't understand anything about magic, Natalia showed a lot of knowledge on the subject. Natalia overhears the conversation and finds it strange that the Demon King's assistant knows nothing about magic. Alan explains that Charlotte is a newcomer and is studying the basics while working with him, winking at Charlotte to play along. He takes the opportunity to suggest to his assistant to ask for help from a prodigy student like Natalia. The girl questions that it's not her duty to train anyone's assistant. Charlotte agrees with her, but says that if she had time to teach something, she would be grateful, even commenting that she might faint from happiness. Natalia then agrees to teach about that day's lesson, but wonders why Charlotte wants her help so much. And so, after Natalia teaches lightning magic, she asks Charlotte why she wants to learn spells. The girl responds that Alan and his friends always protect her, so she wants to become stronger to face anything. Later, Charlotte promises to train in lightning magic, but Natalia reminds her that it's a very advanced spell, and if she has any doubts, she can always ask. Charlotte thanks her for the help when Lou and Gosetsu appear, bringing their and Alan's lunch. All the students are impressed with these two rare creatures, including Natalia. They have lunch together in the cafeteria, and she asks if Charlotte is already a high-level magical creature tamer, not understanding why she wants to learn magic. Charlotte, who clearly doesn't recognize her talent, says she only managed to tame Lou and Gosetsu because of their temperaments, having nothing to do with her. Charlotte noticed that there were no salads on her sister's plate, so she left to get a healthier meal. The girl found it strange that Charlotte cared so much about her, and Alan made up that it might be because she was the same age as Charlotte's sister. Natalia then asked if the two were sent by her family, the Evans. He replied that they were not, and the girl said she just needed to confirm as a precaution. She mentioned that her parents were selfish and snobbish, making for a horrible family. Alan asked if that was why she was studying magic, and Natalia replied that it was one of the reasons. With spells, she could handle most things on her own. He then remarked that she must have been through a lot, mentioning he read about her sister in the newspapers. At that moment, the girl became serious and asked Alan never to bring up that topic in front of her, as it was uncomfortable. Alan apologized, thinking at least Charlotte wasn't there to hear it. Later, Natalia got up and accidentally bumped into a boy from the academy named Chris. He was her rival and promised that her reign would come to an end. Natalia responded to the threat by saying if he wanted to duel, he just needed to set a time. However, the boy left, leaving the situation as it was. At that moment, Charlotte returned, but one of Chris' allies made her fall, spilling her tray of food. They began to mock her, but Natalia immediately confronted the boys, defending Charlotte. Chris questioned her actions, but she said that if he didn't teach his allies good manners, she would do it herself. Alan asked Natalia to calm down as they were in a cafeteria full of students, and causing a fight there wasn't a good idea. Natalia found it absurd that he didn't want to defend his assistant, but Alan made it clear that he didn't intend to forgive their behavior, leaving Charlotte with a bad feeling. Alan snapped his fingers and transported the three, along with Chris' group, into a subspace barrier. The boys panicked, but Chris said that to escape, they just had to defeat the wizard who cast the spell. Everyone attacked Alan, and he decided to take advantage of the moment to teach Natalia 3 important things. He defeated all of Chris' allies, stating that the first lesson was always to prevent your opponent from escaping. Afterward, Alan captured all of them, including Chris, and said the second lesson was never to ignore any opponent. The third and most important lesson was to completely destroy them so they would never dare to oppose again. Saying this, Alan created a huge fireball, leaving everyone frightened. Suddenly, a lightning bolt hit the fireball, destroying his magic. Alan was surprised and saw that Charlotte used the lightning magic Natalia had taught her. Later, Charlotte gave them a stern lecture for fighting. She said she was glad they protected her, but that they had crossed the line because violence wasn't the answer. Alan apologized, and Charlotte told Natalia to apologize too, as she could have been hurt in the fight. Natalia started to say that if something like that had happened, she could heal herself with magic, but Charlotte's gaze made her change her mind and she apologized. Later, while she affectionately pets Lou and Gosetsu, Alan thinks he always knew that Charlotte would manage to cast the lightning spell. Surely this experience will make her more confident in herself. After all, casting a spell on him and delivering a lecture showed significant progress for someone who couldn't even hit a sandbag. Natalia notices Alan's silly smile and he seizes the moment to talk to her. He explains that he knows in the beginning, when she started studying at the academy, she was only helping the more vulnerable and excluded individuals. However, it turned into an army and started bothering people. Natalia confirms the story, expressing her desire to enhance her powers at the academy to become strong as quickly as possible. To practice her skills, people like Chris are convenient targets, but they never stop causing trouble, which was already getting on her nerves. Alan understands and says there's only one thing to do in that situation. Natalia thinks he'll suggest making friends with Chris. Contrary to her expectation, Alan advises her to conquer the Magic Academy and become its leader. Next week, we'll have more of this anime as soon as the new episode is released, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the like button below to support this video. See you guys.